Our next speaker is Dr. Gupta. Is the director of the Oxford Institute for Sustainable Development and the Low Carbon Building Research Group at Oxford Brookes University. He also holds a senior professorial chair in sustainable architecture and climate change in the same university. His research focuses on indoor air quality from building decarbonization, local energy mapping for energy retrofits, and building overheating. Well, as principal investigator, he has secured over 14 million pounds in research grants from various UK research councils and EU funding. And notably, he leads the 1.3 million pounds in the UK research project on residential energy demand reduction in India and co-investigates the 9 million pounds EP's SRC Energy Rev project. Dr. Gupta has published over 175 works and advises the UK Ministry of Justice on building overheating. He is also an ad hoc member of DEFRA Air Quality Expert Group and lives in a smart home equipped with solar energy and electric vehicle technology. Well, that's interesting. So today he's going to be talking to us about climate smart buildings and communities. So Dr. Gupta, please take it away.
Yes, thank you for that introduction and thank you for inviting me to speak. You can see my slides just to confirm.
Yeah. Yes, you can.
Okay, great. So I've been asked to talk about climate smart buildings and communities, and what I thought is just give an overview of what are the challenges and draw from some of the projects that we've been doing in this area. So just to let me just move the screen first. So I run the Low Carbon Building Research Group in Oxford Institute for Sustainable Development in Oxford Brookes University, and we cover a large number of research areas in this field. The key ones are looking at carbon mapping, advanced refurbishment, building adaptation as well, which I'm going to talk about. And we've been doing a number of research projects internationally in this area. Just to remind us why this is important, I think we just need to see the challenges as well. We know about the net zero target that UK and many other countries have set now by the middle of the century. We also know the urgent need to do adaptation because some of that change is happening now and will happen more in the future, and we need to adapt it. Although obviously adaptation is not a substitute for mitigation. There's also the ecological emergency, which we shouldn't disregard in our rush to just save carbon. We also have health inequalities and indoor environments. That's becoming very critical now because as we do net zero measures, we don't want to leave people behind. It needs to have equity in it. Indoor air quality has become a big issue across many countries around the world because this is the air we breathe. 90% of the time we spend in buildings, and we don't measure it that much. It's not regulated as much as outdoor air quality. There's also this growing risk of building overheating in temperate climates such as UK. About 90% of homes are expected to overheat, and this stock is not designed to withstand heat. The previous speaker was talking about cooling, obviously, so this is a growing concern and how that links to health, well-being, and productivity. We also have to upgrade our energy system around the world to make it more in line with renewables, but we have to make sure that all our smartness is fair as well. Otherwise, it will not have the public acceptance that we need. And obviously, there is large-scale digitalization of the built environment happening. So a large number of data streams are coming on board, which were not, easily harnessed before. So, against this, I feel climate smart buildings and communities are really those that can mitigate carbon emissions. So obviously, that's important. Adapt to a changing climate, but using natural energy, by which I mean passive design and smart energy. And I think that's really important that we go in that hierarchy so that we don't dash towards smartness before we've utilized, the natural sources of energy, nature-based solutions and others. So I'm just going to pick up a few projects that we've been doing. I'm very passionate about doing place-based area based initiatives because I find place-based is where you can link with local context and change can happen quickly. So we developed this tool in a project that was just talked about, Leo Local Energy Oxfordshire, which is an online property level spatial mapping tool for planning these initiatives. So where would you deploy heat pumps, solar PVs, EV chargers, with batteries, with heat pumps, and how do you run, profiles on demand profiles and how that changes. And if you overlay that with the time of use tariff, smart tariffs, how does the demand start to change? And we applied that in various parts of Oxford. It uses the Esri GIS system. And it can then kind of start to kind of show to communities and local authorities and urban local bodies how you can, which areas to target first, because they are most appropriate in terms of taking up these measures. And without this kind of spatial intelligence, it's very difficult to understand where to take action. And you can do that for various things, whether it's EV chargers, heat pumps, or a combination. And then what happens to the energy demand as such? So you can work at postcode level, but then you can also kind of start to go into demand profiles. You can see here, you can search by postcode, you can overlay time of use tariff on it, and it starts to give that local area energy planning capability that is required for achieving local net zero. Then the other project we completed was called ERIC. This was putting smart home batteries and solar panels on around 80 homes in Oxford. And it was an area which was deprived socially, and so it was very beneficial to have these. And essentially, the purpose was to increase the self-consumption of PV electricity, reduce peak grid load, and give more control to householders over the energy use. It was part of a large kind of Innovate UK government-funded project with many partners. And what we discovered was really interesting, that where people really benefit from having a battery with solar panels is where their demand tends to be between 7 and 10 kilowatt hours a day, because that's enough where you will have spare solar electricity which charges the battery and then discharges during the evening. So you kind of see the benefit during the peak period here. In the UK, the peak period is around 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the evening. And you can start to see that batteries with PV start to play a significant role, going up to even under 20% during the peak period. And then if you try and do that across the community, so do at a substation level, you can see that you can shift the load by 8% during the evening peak, which is substantial because we are avoiding the need to enforce the grid locally, and also increase more renewables. And that's what smartness is all about that intelligent coordination, I think. So this kind of local area energy planning is vital for that. The other bit I want to go to is climate resilience, because I've been saying about mitigation, but adaptation is very important. And I'm going to pick up one environmental kind of climate change hazard, which is heat, which is really important at the moment. We are just got some funding to look at that in detail. And we know in UK, for example, and across the world, overheating has become a big problem. It's widespread, increasing. In the UK, 9 out of 10 homes are expected to overheat, which will add to about 80% of the cooling energy consumption. And this is not just a comfort problem; it affects mortality and morbidity with elderly and vulnerable. The very young, very old, those with long-term illnesses are especially affected. And buildings obviously are a modifier of that heat. So we need to make sure that they are well adapted. So in Oxford, we've been looking at city level analysis, neighborhood level, building level analysis. So with city level, we started to look at some Earth observation data and started to see where the highest risks were. 3 to 5. And most of the Oxford you can see is apart from the green areas is in a risk zone for heat overheating. And then when you start to look at neighborhoods, and we started to kind of model for future climate, 2030s, 2050s, every home starts to overheat. So the yellow ones are not overheated now, but they start to overheat 100%. So something needs to be done as we embark on this large scale transformation of the building stock through retrofit. So we need to make sure that it's also climate resilient. We've done studies at building level. So these are again flats and homes that we've looked at, and we're finding top floor flats are overheated. Southwest bedrooms overheat quite a bit, and you can see temperatures are inside are going even up to 35 degrees sometimes. So these are conditions which are not conducive obviously for vulnerable populations, and we need to kind of adapt that quickly. Uh, there are various ways of doing that, and our models have kind of shown that obviously you can do a lot of cross ventilation, good window design, shading, thermal mass. But also I don't want to kind of underplay the importance of nature-based solutions where green and access to green and water features that really help the you could also have a light colored, high albedo, high reflective paving and permeable paving, which could reflect the heat. So it's not just a building level solution, it's a neighborhood city level solution, which we need to look at alongside, reducing the demand for energy. Then I want to just, before I end, touch a bit on the international research because I guess the audience is quite international. I've been doing over the last kind of 20 years or so, working not just in the UK, EU, and the US, but also India quite closely. And I'll just take you very quickly through projects because there are links here, and again, people might be interested in kind of accessing this information. So we did a project called Marship, which is mainstreaming sustainable social housing in India. It was funded through the UN Environment Program. And essentially, we developed a toolkit for developers to integrate sustainability in affordable housing or social housing projects right from the outset. We also studied 5 social housing projects in India that were built to sustainability standards to see what worked and what didn't work. And all of this information, including the toolkit and all the kind of research instruments, are available on this website, mainstreamingsustainablehousing.org. It was fairly successful. We worked with some very large housing developers in India as a result. We also did a project in India looking at studying the performance of green buildings because there's the growth in green buildings in India and other countries as well. But there's very little on what actually happens in these buildings after they are built and occupied. So we were trying to gather that empirical evidence on green building in India, and we were doing energy assessment, indoor environment monitoring, and also doing occupant and stakeholder surveys and interviews to try and bring together all that intelligence to see whether these buildings are functioning as expected, and if not, then why not. And what we could learn from them for future building design and specification. Again, the whole report that you see here is available on this website, learn-bp.org. It was funded through the Newton Fund in UK and Royal Academy of Engineering. Then this is the large project that was mentioned. This is the Reside project, which I've been leading with Indian partners on looking at residential building energy demand in India. So it was to examine all aspects of residential energy use in India, including application and evaluation of smart home energy management systems. And we ended up kind of monitoring 2,000 homes in India across all climatic zones, developed these low-cost sensors for monitoring electricity, current and temperature and relative humidity inside homes, because we were trying to see what happens when people are using air conditioners, at what point are air conditioners being used. And one of the findings was that air conditioners are not coming on until it gets about 32 degrees, whereas what the standards are assuming are much lower temperatures that kickstart, because people are adapting as well. We then kind of created these dashboards because there's such large amount of data that we wanted to kind of give it back to the community to be able to do their own queries. And you can see how much data it brings together with electricity, indoor temperature, relative humidity, and other outdoor parameters. So you can start to run your own queries and see when is it happening in terms of the national peak period. And all of this is measured, monitored data. So this is not model data anymore, and we need those kind of data sets anyways to validate our models. So I think it's vital that we kind of share this. And then just to end with some publications that we've done with the UN on social housing, on kind of looking at decarbonizing building stocks across UK, US, India, green building interventions, social housing with UN Habitat. And then the recent report I did with climate resilient communities on adaptation in buildings with the UNFCCC. I think I've probably run out of time, so I should probably stop now. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for that presentation. Of course, it's very excellent. It's always good to see the other side of overcooling, right? So because the previous speaker spoke about cooling, now we're talking about heating. So, well, there's this. I'll probably wait while we wait for questions from participants. I do have one question. There's always this issue of this cost. Right, so it's always like a recurring stuff like that, especially when it comes to like these inventions and trying to like adapt some of these new technologies to suit our purpose. So how would you see the cost? Do you think that probably like for some countries or maybe for areas where they also have issues with overheating, issues with maybe kind of low weather conditions and they need to heat their homes, do you think they'll be able to afford some of these things in terms of cost? And that is the first question. And the second question is about, you mentioned something about, I think it was like kind of a sentence that we need to like kind of employ fairness in climate smartness, right? So could you probably throw more light on that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, so good question. Thank you for those. So first one, cost, I think is really important in relation to tackling overheating, because I think we have to reframe the problem as a public health problem. People are there are excess summer deaths in UK, which was never recorded, is happening now. So this is a serious public health issue. So by adapting buildings for the additional cost that is put in, the number of avoided hospital admissions that is happening will probably offset it by magnitude of factors which will be very very favorable to economists. But I think we don't look at it. I think we should, rather than look at costs, to start talking about value of doing it, and then things become much more favorable. The second point I think is really important. What we are observing now, doing all these place-based local area initiatives, is that not everyone has energy assets by which they can participate in smart energy markets or be able to trade energy or even kind of benefit from export tariffs. And the reason that is happening is because most of the regulation is designed for people who can have energy assets and who can then have additional incomes or savings. What we are arguing is that it has to be fair as well. So we must consider those people who don't have PV. So one of the projects that we did was to actually try and link those with PV systems or solar PV and those without through batteries. So someone who didn't have a solar PV because they didn't have the money to get it or didn't have adequate roof area could still benefit from the solar electricity when the other person who had the panels did not use it or did not want to use it. So I think and we also have to think about digital literacy here. How do we kind of, how do we train people so that they are able to engage with that smartness as well? And without that, there will be a backlash and public acceptance of this transition will not be accepted. So I think smart and fair is really important. And this is something given by Center for Sustainable Energy in the UK. And I think it's a very important mantra that we need to keep in mind as we move towards smart energy systems.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. There are other couple of questions in the Q&A, so if you have time, you can always probably go through them and answer them at your free time. So thank you very much once again.